cat at bay. We're just going to do a sound test. Can the folks in the back actually hear me if I'm over here? All right. This is an excellent mic then.
It's music in your voice, yeah.
Before we get started, can I have a show of hands of anybody here who's actually doing continuous integration right now in some form? More than I expected. Good. Good to start. Yeah, and can I, just as a second thing, how many people are actually gone beyond basic continuous integration and are now automating deployments? All right, so that's about right. Okay, all right, just wanted to see where we're at in terms of sophistication here in the room. It looks like you guys are already going way on. Maybe I should set some expectations before we go down. I'm going to be talking primarily about how you get started with continuous integration and also how you go about the process of doing better than what you're doing right now. We're not going to get into like infrastructure as code. We're not going to be getting into doing any kind of things like using Chef or Octopus Deploy or anything like that. We're going to be focusing very much on the process of getting better at what you're doing. So given that, I think we're about time. Is it all right if we get started?
Yes.
Yeah. All righty, let's do this. All right, so just as an introduction, my name is Jason. I work currently with Nonlinear Digital up in Canada. I also am part of a team that works on the accelerator Keystone, so fair warning, you may see a lot of things that say the word Keystone on it, and that's what's on my machine. Sorry, boys. So I work with Sitecore a lot, but I'm also in the ALM and DevOps side of things in terms of consulting. Now, some folks will say, isn't that the same thing? And those of you who know anything about ALM and DevOps know that is not. And actually, there's a lot of confusion out there in the thing. I try to look at both. I guess my passion is really on the deployment side, which is why we're here talking about continuous integration. And that's kind of where I focus a lot of my time. I also, as a very bad goalie for ball hockey, so I don't know why I decided that I like to have large men shoot balls at my face, but that's something that I enjoy doing. And also this year I did a first. I became a dad, so I now have a 8-month-old at home. This is actually the first time that I've spent any significant time away from the house. So it's been an interesting experience. I'm sure some of you are also in that scenario where you're away from little ones for the first time. What I wanted to do today is talk about continuous integration, but if you guys will indulge me, I'd like to go on a little bit of a tangent into something that I'd like to talk about, which is continuous improvement, a little bit of a soapbox of mine. What I'm finding is we're in a scenario where a lot of people start talking about I want to do continuous integration. I want to do automated deployments production. I want to get monitoring in there. How can I put all these tools together and get really excited? And they forget that they actually have to do something. It's really exciting to talk about tools. It's exciting to talk about new things. We've seen a lot of folks talk here today and yesterday. Awesome stuff that most of us have never even thought we could do. And what we forget about is how to get there. So right here, what I've been doing is I've been trying to talk to a lot of folks about doing continuous improvement. There are so many things out there that you could be doing. You can't do it all. You're trying to tackle a whole DevOps cycle of how do you go from an idea to something in production where someone is making money off of your idea. And there's so many different things. What I'm finding though, everybody's stuck down in build. We're all trying to talk about how do I do my source control? How do I do continuous integration? We're not even getting to continuous delivery. We're not talking about operations. Maybe some of us out here are probably doing some of this stuff, but everybody's still really focused down here trying to figure out how do we solve the basic building blocks of all this. And what happens is, what I've seen with my clients, they're operating, most of you have heard the metric, about 80% of the cost of software is in maintenance, but they're not doing anything about it. And they're still trying to fix the dev problem. Now that makes sense. We need to get there. So we have to start the building blocks. And what I wanted to do is it's not about start talking about automated prod deployments and do that right now. It'll take you years to get there if you're still down in the build phase. So what this means is you guys have to start thinking about plans. What is important to me as a business? How do I get there? And how do I then take where I am and build on it in little steps? Every time you don't do something is time you are wasting doing better. So this model, by the way, is available for download along with the slides, so you guys can take this. And what I'm hoping you can do is you can take it home, think about, is there anything on this list I'm not doing right now that's better than what I'm doing now? How do I do that one step? And then think about the next step after that. Because what we want to do is do better. Now, one of the things we can do is automation. Automation allows us to change our culture, allows us to change our processes, allows us to change our tools. What we're trying to get with deployment automation is a way to repeat the entire process. We don't want to have it in some guy's head who's been working there for 10 years, he's figured out everything, and then he goes, hey, I won the lottery, I'm not coming to work tomorrow, bye. You can't have that. You need people who can know how to come in. You can bring in a guy and know how exactly he's going to operate and get this stuff out to production. You need to be able to get this culture in. A lot of folks don't think about the automated deployments when they're building, which means that when you go to automate the deployments, it suddenly doesn't work. And you start doing things like, oh, I'll just exclude all these files so they don't push, and we'll manually push these other things. When you start thinking everything is always going to be deployed, you start thinking, how do I build so that it can be deployed? You also discourage that culture of, I'll just fix the config file, and we'll deal with it later. Data folder.config on every single server. I'll just manually edit the file path there. That's fine. It's not fine. I know we've all done it. I've done it. I've deployed DLLs straight to production to debug a problem. I've done it. We have to stop doing it. It's too much risk. That file goes out there, somebody pushes an automated deployment, wipes out that change you manually did, site blows up, nobody knows why, there's no traceability, you have no history, the file's gone. So how do we get to this? How do we start on this track? So we start talking about continuous integration. And the first thing we have to say is when we're taking on continuous integration, what we're saying is, if it's working on my machine, it's not good enough. Everyone's heard this mantra. You have to be working as an integrated all the time. But you can't just go and do the full bore and start running unit tests and building everything in an atomic scale. It's not gonna happen. You guys probably are trying to do that and you're seeing it's very expensive. That's okay to start small. You want to just, your goal is, whatever you're doing, make sure you're not the only one testing it. Put it somewhere else. The other piece of your culture change you need to think about is, if you broke it, you fix it. That means 5 p.m. on a Friday, you're about to head out the door, you are not checking in. Or you're checking in, and you're waiting to see if that build passed. It's your ownership of your code. And it's no longer good enough for you to just say, the deployment manager will figure it out. So now we're going to do a little bit of a, well, hopefully, working demo. So what I'm going to walk us through here is going to be, how do we go about making a change, making sure it's working, and getting changes out. So what I've set up is a very simple, there is nothing but this one component on a home page. And what I want to do and get to is be able to take the code that I have in my solution and get it over here and make changes, be able to deploy. How do I go about doing that? This is my continuous integration site. So what I've done, I've set up a little Git server locally, just so you guys know I'm cheating a little bit, because I did not know what the internet connection was going to be like here. So I've got Bonobo running, and I've also installed TeamCity, which took me about 7 minutes to get to nothing. And I've got a little test build that I've put in place. But what we're going to do is we're going to show the process from scratch. So once you've got a tool like TeamCity in, which is a free continuous integration tool that you can just set up through a wizard, put it anywhere. It's got up to, I think it's 20 projects, build configurations you can do for free. You just patch in, say I'm going to create a project. We're going to do SUGCON demo. Create a project. So when we're doing projects, this is if folks are familiar with TFS or other source control systems, you usually do this to try to get a little level of security in. So when you're thinking about continuous integration, maybe start thinking also what's going to be on next after continuous integration. Are we going to start deploying to QA? Are we going to start deploying to our integrated test? By doing projects and stuff, you can start doing security levels so that the QA guys can come in and do the QA builds, but they're not messing around with the integrated test, and start separation of concern that way. In this case, we're just doing the one project, and I'm going to create a build configuration. When I get to this step, again, very simple. I just want to have a quick little CI build. Now, I'm going to be asked, how do I get my code? Now, if you're using a tool like TeamCity and most of the other more modern ones, you get to have options of multiple source controls. I'm going to go with Git because I've got something local. I want to give it a little name. What's in that Git? And then I'm going to pull up from my Bonobo server, or Bonobo, I don't know how it's pronounced. I'm going to put in a fetch URL. I'm going to go with the default branch. I'm just trying to get something going. And this is basically the work that you have to do to set up a connection to your source control. There's a lot of settings here, so if you really want to go to town, you can. Test my connection, bam. If that had gone red, we would have really been in trouble. So now, I've got build configuration, it's connected to my source control. But it doesn't do anything. So whenever you're building for continuous integration, you're thinking about scripts. If you guys have been doing it the old school way and you've been writing like bash files or something like that for years, this is kind of like bringing it to the GUI. And if you're using something in Visual Studio Online, they're now switching over to this type of model as well. I can go in and start creating my build steps. My first thing I want to do, I want to check the build. So I'm just going to run MS build. I'm going to be ambitious and think it's going to be able to deploy. I'm going to drill in, pick my solution. So in this case, I'm actually seeing the tree from source control. See my solution. Pick it. All right, I want to do a .NET 4.5, x64. I need some command line parameters. I'm going to cheat again. Command line parameters for MS Build, if any of you have done them, super annoying. Yeah, it's only one line. If you put a semicolon out of space, and the error messages are not helpful. So if you wind up trying to play around with command line parameters and you're seeing all kinds of weird errors and you don't know what it is, you probably have a space where you shouldn't. So this is the kind of annoying part. So what I've done here, and I'm just gonna zoom in on this because it's a little bit hard to read down there. All right, so what am I doing in here? I'm basically saying I want a specific build configuration. So this is something that I recommend doing, is trying to target environments with build configurations, not just doing everything on debug. What it allows you to do is to start tailoring your builds to different environments. Also lets you set up for saying, I'm not just doing CI. What about QA? What about production? And you can start saying, I can now tweak what I'm doing with my builds on a build configuration level. What I'm also doing in here is doing some extra little things that are specific you don't have to worry about necessarily, but I have TDS and Keystone in my build. So I'm telling Keystone what site core I'm using. I'm also telling TDS whether or not I want to generate a package and whether or not I'm doing a desktop build, which doesn't necessarily do automated syncs. So in this case, I'm trying to set up TDS and Keystone as well for this deployment. Going back here. So what else do I have? .NET coverage, not gonna do any of that right now. Let's save this. So now I have build step. So I've set up version control. I've set up something that I can secure it with, and I've got at least the definition of what I wanna do. Still not actually gonna do anything, because I don't have a trigger set up. So triggers are, when do I want to do what I've just set to do? So here I go in, I'm gonna just add a new trigger. And I'm going to pick a VCS trigger, because I want to trigger it every time someone checks in. Now you can think about this on your own team, what's going to work. For the purposes of the demo, I'm going to do it on every single check-in, and I'm not going to do a quiet period mode. If you do this in your actual team, your team is going to revolt. Because what's going to happen is there's going to be 20 check-ins that happen inside of like 10 minutes, and all of a sudden the entire build server is queued up, where everybody's got a one-line check-in that's happened. So you probably want to be thinking about, what's the time I want to wait between pushing out to CI? What's that minimum time where I'm okay with grabbing groups of check-ins together? So try to figure out what works for your team. If your CI build is taking something like 10 minutes, you probably do not want to have a 3-minute quiet mode, because you're just going to be overlapping on top of each other. Also, if your CI build is taking 10 minutes, you have other things to look into. Now I've got a trigger. I'm going to go into my project list. So I'm showing up. I'm just going to run this. So what I'm doing here is I've triggered a manually run. It's going to go and get the source control. I can see that I've got agents running. So any of the modern tools there that support the ability for multiple agents, so you can start distributing out the processing. This is very important in terms of your teams being able to do things synchronously, especially if you're running multiple projects. We have something like 15 or 16 projects on the go at a time sometimes, and we can't have every team, every time they check in, waiting for the other team to be able to get through. So in this case, the agent's finished running. Let's go back, let's check on this stuff. Oh, kaboom, red build. Okay, so at this point, maybe it worked on my machine. Maybe I didn't bother compiling my code before I checked it in. Maybe it's 5 p.m. on a Friday, I just want to go have a beer. No matter what, this went red, I can't leave. I'm stuck, because I gotta fix this. And one of the things that a lot of these tools also give you is the ability to start investigation. Some teams don't actually enforce this. It's kind of a cultural thing to say to other people on the team, yeah, I'm gonna go look at it. If you have a lot of people who potentially could figure out the fix, it's kind of nice to be able to say to everybody, yeah, don't worry, I got this. So even though you've got that, you broke it, you fix it model, sometimes somebody knows when they see that error, oh wait, I know what this is, I can go and get that written out. Let the team know somebody's looking at it. So I'm assigned to fix this build, and that's what I'm gonna do. So I can see by the error message where I've gotta go, much like you would see in your Visual Studio project. I can come in, I cheated a little bit, and I got it set up in advance so I can see right where the red error is. Sure enough, apparently slid on the S. Made a change. Now we want to see this actually work. Take a look at my changes. In this case, I'm going to do a commit and push right away, straight to master, because real devs commit to master. And now I'm going to take a look at my project list again. So what's happening now is TeamCity is going to be polling. I've set it up on a default 15 seconds. At every 15 seconds, it's going to go and check the VCS. Is there something to do? Oh, look there, it found something to do. Now it's running. I can drill in, see who made the change, see what the comment was, drill in to see the file. Do I want to look at the actual change details? All this is running, it looks good. I'm liking what I'm seeing. Looks like I've got a green build. All right, I fixed the bug. Well, that's great, but this doesn't actually show me doing anything to automate anywhere else. I haven't achieved continuous integration. I've achieved continuous build. And this is something a lot of teams forget there's a difference. Just running unit tests and compiling is great, and please do it. It's that first step, but we want to do better. So how do we get to the point where not only are we sure our tests are running and our code compiles, but that there's somewhere that a QA can go in and start doing their testing, that someone can actually look at the UI. Most of us know that you're probably not testing site core, and most of us also know that you can do stuff that you're not going to see until you open Page Editor and it blows up in your face. So you need a way to actually get in there and see what's going on. So I'm going to do a little show and tell here of how I would go about doing that. So I'm going to be right up front and say I'm cheating. I'm using TDS in this build, and I've pre-set up some build configurations. So I've got my SUGCON configuration in here, and I've got a Keystone master project in here. Now you can use Unicorn or Ship, however you want to do it. What we're doing here is I'm using TDS as a way to deploy items and code at the same time, straight from source control out. And I want to be able to do this easily. So this tool for me fit what I needed to do. I just want to be able to say, look, I've got a project, get everything out. So again, on the cheating scale, I'm trying to have all this set up. I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to give my URL. So right now, I'm going to say, I want a URL. Where is my website? Now what this does is it's going to tell TDS in this case where the location is that it should go and hit the web service. And then I want a deploy folder, and this is for files, but also for the serialization files. So I think Cam was talking about getting those serialization files over to the server so they can go get sucked into this. This is a similar type of model where you want to serialize everything you've got in your package along with your files, get it over to the server, and start running your process. So all I'm doing is doing that. I'm going to test. It's going to run through. Can it match up all this stuff? Oh, all looks good. Guess we'll check that in. So right now what we've done is taken what, maybe 5 minutes all in, try to get all this done. Now you have to get TDS in some other time on top of that, but depending on your tool, that'll be up to you. Here we go. I want to do it automated deploy. That. Now it's not good enough for me to actually just say, where am I going to push things? How am I going to know that I'm pushing stuff? So we're going to go and do a little change. Not anything fancy, not anything really nice looking, because I am not a front-end developer. But in this last file, I'm just going to add a little bit of CSS. We're going to go and make sure that my CSS has been updated for that one control that's on the page, so I can see that something's actually getting it. All right. Quick CSS. Now I'm going to push. Do I have any unsync commits? Nope. We're all good. All right. Head back to Team City. All right. And now what Team City is going to do, same 15-second thing. Oh, hey, we've got some changes. So now there's 2 coming in as a batch. We've got the 3 files that got updated with the CSS, got the automated deploy setting coming in, and now we're going to get running on there. Team City at this point thinks that there's 10 seconds left. It is wrong. So a lot of these tools, what they do is they try to be helpful and tell you how long is it going to be until you can actually know something. Unfortunately, like most of us, if you're running Agile, anybody running Agile? There's some form of that framework? Okay, for those of you doing that, know about velocity probably. Velocity is completely inaccurate unless you've actually built up historical data and doing the same thing. What have we done? We have some historical data. We did a build. We did one build that actually worked. And that build was not doing a deployment. So now we have two builds doing completely different things that are going to run at completely different times. So the estimation of time is going to be different. So when you're going in and it's way over time and it starts warning you going what's going on, that's what it's doing. It's trying to build up that velocity history and figure out, well, how is this going to go? When you make massive changes and you suddenly see the time that's taking either go way down or way up, you probably broke something. Even if the build goes green, something's wrong because your deployments are not acting the way they used to. So keep an eye on your history like that. Now, one of the things you can also do is actually drill in, and okay, maybe I have too much time on my hands. I like to look at the build log as it's going, just to see what's actually happening. And I can see, okay, yeah, there's a bunch of items going out here, and it's running more templates. So it's doing a bunch of stuff. And I can also drill in, try to take a look at the changes and more, and try to figure out, okay, why is it taking so long this time? Drill in, okay, oh, Jason's doing weird stuff with the deployment files. Okay, that's probably why it's doing all this. Now what it's going to do eventually when it's finished is it's going to have everything all loaded up on my site. And I can see if there's a thread dump, we've got a warning. Or 1 minute 56 past the 10-second initially estimated. All doing this. I know it's really fun to watch a little cycle going on the progress bar. But what we're trying to do here is get stuff out from one place to another. It's doing items. However you want to do items is great. I'm doing items via TDS, and what I'm doing in there in Visual Studio is setting up what do I think I need to pull. So I can actually exclude things from certain build configurations. I can set up the generation, but what I'm really trying to do is control what gets overridden. So you can see there's some entries in here that are Site4 items. Now if I'm deploying to a 7.2 instance and the next day I'm deploying to an 8 instance, I might be overriding stuff. So one of the things I do is I control with TDS what can go out deploy once, what can go out deploy always, so that I don't overwrite things that aren't supposed to be overridden that are already there. So this is just one of the things that you can use this tool for. And for me, this is what's supporting my deployment capacity. Now if we go back to Team City, check in, oh, we're all done. Green bill. Let's see what happened. Now Sitecore spinning up. It's received all the new files. It's received all these new items. Now what you might be saying is, well, how are you going to get those new changes if you just push a bunch of items? So yes, if you want to actually see things on the end user's perspective, think about publishing. How are you going to actually do a publish? Well, it looks like we got a little CSS change down here. So my files definitely got through. I've gotten the change. It's gone through the whole process. So if you haven't been able to do this already, we just did this in what, 20 minutes? You can probably find 20 minutes on the weekend to just throw this up if you guys don't have something like this already going. So if you're thinking about items, you probably want to be thinking about how do I publish that? How do I put more steps into my continuous integration build to start leveraging Sitecore? Maybe you want to get some PowerShell extensions in there. Just start playing around. You can run PowerShell through TeamCity as well. And many other tools. But that's the end of that. I know it's an intro, and I saw all those hands that went up and said, yeah, I'm doing continuous integration, so most of you are like, yeah, get on with it. We can do better than this. We can start transforming. We need to start thinking about what's beyond continuous integration. What do I do to get into different environments? Now, how can I do that easily? You might be thinking, oh yeah, well I can use Octopus Deploy or Microsoft Release Manager, and it's got tokenized configs and all that stuff. Anyone who's ever tried to tackle any of those tools knows that there is an investment to get in there. There are ways that you can take that baby step to go from where you are now to get onto that path. One of the ways to do that is your environment configurations. So with Sitecore, we've all had the hassle of the include files, trying to patch things, and it's like, oh, well, it's different for the content delivery role, and I need these files on the authoring. Well, what about if I need to harden an instance in production? There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. Most of us wind up manually changing it per instance and doing the manual hardening. You can automate all of this. And one of the things that we can do easily is put in a mechanism that's going to allow us to put those environment-specific settings for each environment. It only goes out there, and we want to start small. So again, you could do a big, huge release manager thing, but right now you're just trying to increment. How do we get a little bit over there? So introducing transforms. Any of you worked with Microsoft Transforms for your web config at all? Okay, how many of you know what Slow Cheetah is? Oh, good. How many of you actually use Slow Cheetah on your builds? Okay, so everyone who knows about Slow Sheet basically is using it now. That's a good adoption rate. There's a reason for its adoption rate. It's easy, it's free, plugs right into your IDE, and it works. Now, some of you who've used Slow Sheet probably know there's a little bit of workarounds you have to do. TDS can take it out of the box. You don't have to edit your web project, it'll actually just find these files. Why are you doing this? Because include files, XML overrides, all those things can be transformed, and you can do it environment specific. You can do it version specific. Let's say you have an override for 7.2, it's not valid for 8. You can set build-up configurations up so that you can deploy an override for your component insert dialog, so that it works in all the versions of Sitecore that you need to put something out for. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So what I'm going to do here in the Solution Explorer, so I'm going to go find a little config file. There we go. We'll pull it up and we'll get it big in a second. All right, so I've got a security config file here that I want to create transformations for different informations. In this case, it's just setting up some basic settings. What I do is I just let's scroll this down. This is totally invisible here. Yes. Thank you for not expanding. There we go. So I have an option here because I've got Slow Sheet in here to add a transform. You can see I've done some of this before. All right. Now I want to actually change something. So now what I've done is for my different build configurations I've got in different settings. And in my SUGCON file, I'm doing something a little different than the others. These ones are not changing anything in the base. But what I've done here is I've set up a transform. And what is it doing? It's saying go find this setting in my patch and put the value to 24. Match on the name. Well, what does that look like? Okay, I want to see what my change is going to be. I can right click and I can actually preview this transform. At this point, what I'm doing is actually seeing both the original. This is what everybody else is getting. They've got that 4. But I can see I'm going to get 24. And this is what's going to happen in my build configuration. I can do this in every single environment. Prod, QA, whatever you want to do. You can set up all your settings that need to be, you've got file paths for your data folder. Sure, whatever. Put them all in source control. You don't have to do anything anymore manually. You can start taking all these things that you're doing, and this is going to change how you start architecting as well. Because you may have been trying to put things into your database and figuring out ways to do environment-specific things so you can share it everywhere. But you don't necessarily need to. Maybe it's easier for you to just do it on the file system. Now, for the purists in the room, you're probably saying, no, file system is not the way to go, because that's not the way that I'm going to want to deploy my solution. But we're talking about increments here. This is another way to do a little bit better.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I know you can use that for connection string configuration.
Yep.
In a delivery environment, you typically wouldn't have Active Directory access, so you might do a SQL connection and connect directly to the SQL server.
Correct.
How would you handle the security around the connection string configuration?
Are you talking about specifically what the connection string would be in source control?
Right.
Yeah, so in those scenarios where you want to put something out, I actually suggest usually using trusted connections, which put the configuration down onto your app pool user. If you're starting off, you're probably putting your user ID, password right in the connection string file, and you want the sysadmins to be the only ones who have access to that. And when you start thinking about pulling stuff into source control, you have to start thinking, how do I get that security out of those flat files? And that's when you start removing things. So with SQL Server Trusted Connections, it will use the identification of the actual application identity to make its opening out to SQL Server. So you start actually at that point, now you're not needing anything in terms of environment-specific connection strings. So, well, you may need, if you have different database names, maybe you have a shared instance and they have slightly different, but you can actually now even remove transforms from your build because you've gone to a point where you can start sharing and doing something that's more at the infrastructure level. So that would be one approach that I would suggest for that scenario. Another question?
Yeah, please.
Oh, by the way, Mike.
So we have a multi-tenant installation, so we control our web configs and stuff like that kind of outside of the web project in its own container that
Okay.
is shared between our solutions.
All right, so you, maybe I'll try to reword it and see if I understood. You've got a separate project that is just doing web config, and that's just, and then everybody references that, and that's how you get your configurations.
Between our solutions, since we have multiple sites, multiple solutions on a single instance.
All right.
Can you still use like the transforms and stuff like that, or does it have to, do your transforms have to exist in the web application?
They don't. I will admit that I haven't been putting flat files outside my web application. They don't have to. The way Slowcheetah works is it's wherever it is that you can go and do your transform. So if you're doing web config transforms right now, if it's actually just a web config, you don't even need Slowcheetah for that. The web config is already out of the box with it, but if you want to start pushing your app config as well, you should be able to put all those transforms in there. It comes down to the build process. So TDS is just basically looking through the files you're telling it to pull. If you're wanting to do it without TDS, there's a notation you put in your project file that tells it what the transform syntax is, so that you can look at it. If you look at how the web config transforms go in, you can add the same line into your project file and basically say, I want to pull these files in. So that's a way, if you want to not use a tool to go do searching, you could actually control that yourself. And you basically give the syntax of, this is the file I'm looking for, this is how I want to replace it, and do the files that way. And actually, it works in great, by the way. I was about to jump into the questions area, so I think we have plenty of time for questions. I wanted to make this kind of a conversation. If you guys don't have questions, I do have for you. So.
Yeah, I had heard Slowcheetah before, so that answers a lot of my big type of questions. So if I understood this correctly, you use Slowcheetah to build, and for every different build configuration, you get a different set of transforms.
Yes, potentially, yes.
But if you, so I try to use the same deployments for both my content delivery and content master. So how do you manage that?
In that case, when you're doing, so you noticed that when I was setting up Team City and I was putting those build configurations in, I was also specifying what build configuration do I want to use for this deployment. In your case, you only have one for both your CA and your CD. So you don't have to do environment-specific build configurations, right? It's more of, every time you have an environment difference, you want to introduce something to support those differences. So in your case, you might have a, let's call it a QA, which might have a CA and a CD. They might be all the same things, and you can just use your QA build configuration to go out to all your servers in QA.
But I have different directory structure, or I have different directories.
Okay. So you have some stuff.
For my content delivery versus my content master. So would I have to do a build twice to get those two different configs?
I guess it would come down to, like, it sounds like there's a little bit of complexity there that I'd like to drill into. You could achieve it. My personal thing is, my first attempt would be, it sounds like you have two configurations, okay, and sometimes you have things that you're doing twice. So the way that transforms work is that it runs off a base. And so typically what I'll tell clients is, if you have a lot of stuff that's all the same across most of it, and try to transform in your exceptions. So you might have like one or two that are a little bit exceptional. And you'll notice also, if you go the build configuration approach, this does not scale. You are not going to want to have 50 different servers with 50 different build configurations and every file having 50 transforms. So we're talking about continuous improvement here, but in your scenario, you probably have a scale that's small enough in that scenario where you could handle the extra overhead and try to do your majority of shared up at the top level and only do your exceptions. All right? Yes?
What was the version control that you were using in Visual Studio?
I was using GitHub's local Git server Bonobo as my actual server that was running locally. And for Visual Studio, I was just using the native tools that are in Visual Studio to connect to Git backend. I happen to also have Atlassian source tree if I ever want to really go in. I am not a command line guy, I'm sorry. I know you guys some of you who are real Git guys are like, if you don't know the command line, you're not a real coder. I'm sorry. I use tools that are in the UI. It's where I live in my IDE. At the back?
Last time I used SlowCheetah, it was a while ago, and I remember it had lots of problems trying to transport the web config. Has that changed since?
I haven't seen any issues with the web.config problems. I use Visual Studio to do the web.config itself. I don't use SlowCheetah for that. I use SlowCheetah for things that are not the web.config, which Visual Studio out of the box doesn't actually give you the option to do. It's all supported under the hood, but the UI components aren't there to really get in. It's all using the same transformation language that's used default. SlowCheetah is mostly giving you the plugin to be able to go and actually do the change. I haven't run into any issues with having SlowCheetah actually do the operation, because it's natively mostly MS Build running it. Although I should make a caveat, anyone who's really getting into SlowCheetah, it is currently on kind of like support only mode. So the developer who's on there has actually joined.
Microsoft just posted to Connect that they actually are going to continue visual support.
Yeah, but I think what's happened is he actually joined the team that's doing the next Visual Studio, and he's worked with them to actually pull it in. It's not going to be a separate thing. It's now going to be actual Microsoft thing. It's no longer just going to be a community piece. So if you go to the SlowCheetah, that's going to be what you can use right now, and then Microsoft's going to be coming out with the official, like, do it for real in the IDE. Oh, yes, the back.
You broke down the TDS projects into columns and templates and different multiple projects. So when we create a build for that, do we need to keep in mind the order of the previous projects that we built?
That's a good question. Yes, you do have to think about it. When I architect my TDS projects, what I try to do is set a master of some kind. So, and that does the multi-project reference to the other ones, and then I'll set the order in that way that I want them to run. So in my simple scenario here, I've got a master that's running the whole thing, and it's pulling in core, and so it runs the core stuff first. TDS will usually try to figure out what goes first as much as possible, but I would typically say you want to push your core stuff first, you want to put your templates and like things like layouts and things like that next, and do your content last. If you ideally you're not pushing any content. That would be great. Like, don't push the media library if you have to. If you're a tool developer like me, you have some stuff you're trying to give people, so you have things that you have to put out like that. But typically you want TDS to be managing what your solution is, what's the building blocks of your dev piece. And usually those things can go out as a package, and the serialization just handles the rest.
Sorry, I've got another question. When you're deploying.
Oh, speaking. Sorry, I got a few. Go ahead.
Do you have a deployment strategy for when you deploy your items to production? For example, you know, the whole idea of Chef is I can build a brand new server and put everything there.
Yep.
But the problem with that is I have content on my production server, and so I can't, you know, build a brand new server. But so do you have any experience on what the best way to deploy? You know, deploy changes, deploy upgrades, that type of thing?
Okay, so in a typical production environment, fully automated, you're going to have a lot of things where you're taking down the server. Ideally, you probably have some way to have the server get backed up before you start anything. Backups, everybody who's not doing backups, get backups in. I ran into a client where everything got deleted. We lost 2 weeks of content entry work, by the way. Please put backups in place. So for a production environment, most folks are going to say do packages so that what you're deploying is something you've already tested, and you can do something like Chef, get that package tested so you know what's going to go is going to work. I enjoy having multiple content delivery nodes, even if I don't actually have the load for it, for the simple fact that I can keep my site up by taking one down in my scripts, using something like either like PowerShell to like remotely access IIS and take it down, do the push out, so it's out of the load balancer pool, bring that back up, do the same thing on the other content delivery node. That allows you to maintain your uptime. It also allows you, if you want to, run your tests against that content delivery node after you've deployed. And that allows you to then say, should I even bother going to the next one? And at least you know you've got that one node up and still running, while you try to figure out what went wrong with the build. Hopefully nothing's going wrong with your deployments, but I think everyone here has had the site blow up after you've dropped a package. Any other questions? Mike?
So how do you take content from authoring and bring it into lower environments so that people testing it can get a feel for what the current production looks like?
I would say there are probably 4 approaches that I've used to differing success. My preferable way is to grab the whole backup and get exactly what's there, but that's build specific. Some people put environment specific stuff in the database, and you don't want to have to go and start messing around in Sitecore of like, oh, this config item is pointing to the wrong URL, and I go. So if you've got that, that's probably not going to work, just grabbing the whole database. There are tools out there like Razzle or even Unicorn and stuff like that where you can serialize a large batch and push it over and look at the deltas. So those are 2 other approaches that you might want to go with. I've actually had to use TDS, so I can just pull it down into my Visual Studio, see what it is, and then push it out to another environment. That process is the worst. Don't do it unless you actually have to. But when you get into that scenario, it's like, I need it to work. I don't know how the tool works. Something's going wrong. You can grab it manually yourself. I have actually seen people do Sitecore packages, but typically at scale, it doesn't work. Like you try to install a package, it's just spinning, and you don't actually see what's happening. So I'd say the first option, if you can grab the backup file and bring that down and test against that, it'll also change how you go about designing your architecture. If that becomes your model, you start designing to be able to support that. I can put any database anywhere, and it doesn't matter, because I can just deploy and it's going to be updated. So environment-specific configs are in your build configuration that are going to go to that environment, and I can just say, I'm grabbing production, drop it, hit a build, done. That's what you want to get to. I think there's another question back here.
Yeah, so your build actually did a deploy. So if you were going to run unit test after your build, how would you deploy after unit test?
Good question. So what I did here was running my deploy as part of MS Build. So what I can also do is actually start splitting that up. So I said I'm going to push out, because I gave it a web URL, and I enabled all the file deployments. I can actually turn that off. And I can just do the compile, run all the unit tests. Then I can run another step that's actually going to take the result of the compile as a package and push that out on its own. You might use something like Sitecore Ship, or TDS I think now has a web service that allows you to take packages and push it across, or Octopus Deploy has that ability to grab packages and push. So that's a good next step, right? When we're talking about incrementing, do better. So you've got something that works really right now for continuous integration. How do we start thinking about, now I want unit tests. That's that, now we're in here. Now you start splitting up, your script gets bigger. You start chunking it out, and you start introducing new tools. Just make sure you're doing this one at a time. Don't try to go to the end. Try to do one step at a time. Introducing unit tests is a great example of how you start taking something that's very simple and do a little bit more. And you want to block that build. That's that basic requirement, right? You want to stop it and not deploy. So it's a great example.
The implication, to me at least, of doing a kind of continuous integration and deployment to QA and then onto other platforms is that you end up potentially pushing out, like effectively a whole kind of serialized chunk of content each time rather than just changes.
The big package, yes.
I've kind of there's been what you might describe as a religious war inside my organization when you're dealing with long-term clients.
Yes.
Whether deploy everything is better than deploy just what we changed. Do you have a position on that?
Do I have a position in a religious war? Okay, I will try to be tactful. I have a position, and I fought that war, and I have lost. I think for any of you who get into that religious war, for anyone who didn't hear, it's basically the fundamental of, do I deploy just the changes, or do I deploy Big Bang? If anyone is on either side of the fence, you will never convince them that the other side of the fence is better. It's not going to work. Just admit that that's what they want, and that if they have a bigger stick than you do, there's nothing you can say to get them off that. But what I will say is that my position is that if I'm trying to do a model whereby what is on the server is what is in source control, I want everything that got checked in on that server. And I don't know what somebody did to that server, but if somebody went in and messed around, I don't care. I'm obliterating it. Because what if somebody only checked in one small config file change? But meanwhile, Buddy over on Ops was patch fixing a bug, and he edited like 50 files, right? Didn't check it in the server. Well, I don't know about that, and if I do the big bang, it's all gone. Ops team's gonna be like, what did you do? And I'm gonna say, you didn't follow the basic principle. We always check in everything. We test together, we bring the teams together. You're not off in your own world. And so that's my position, that's where I go in that war.
I think I may be the person who proves, is the exception that proves your rule, because I started off on the just deploy the changes, and I'm now in agreement with that.
Okay, yeah, so I think the just deploy the changes, there are models by which you can do that, and there are tools that are out there for it. So what I've shown obviously today is to support my own feeling of the war, but when you go to the Delta, you're gonna go faster. And some folks are gonna tell you faster is better, and it is. So there are models whereby, let's say you're doing continuous deployment, where every time you check in, you are going to production. This is awesome. I don't think everybody understands how awesome it can be that you can have your fix, have revenue being generated the moment you check in code. Every business is scared of this, yet they should be doing it. It makes no sense, right? But if you're doing the everything in solution going out all as one big bang, do you really want to have to wait half an hour while that whole thing is going to production? So in that scenario, shipping deltas is quicker, faster, more agile, and you're able to get, let's say we're dealing with something like, I don't know, Etsy. Their entire business is making money, right? Like they don't really have anything other than connecting people to stuff that's for sale. If they take their site down for a half hour, they've lost revenue for a half hour. This could be millions of dollars. In that case, they can't afford a half-hour deployment. They need it to go like that. Push it out. It can take 50 minutes through the test process with Chef and all that stuff. But when it goes to touch production, it has to be fast, and that means Delta's only. So in that scenario, yes, the Delta only, that would work. Anything else? Right here.
If you want to use continuous deployment, I'm now basically setting up 3 teams who are working on different parts of one website.
Yep.
And I don't want to have merge conflicts solved every 2 weeks. So I just want to have everything that's tested and cool, that's deployed to production. But I don't necessarily want to have every feature already in production usable.
Right.
So have you ever thought about that and worked with something like that? And have a solution to like a feature toggle or something?
I'm going to steal from someone, because I will be honest, every client I've tried to do that with has gone, I don't know if I'm ready for that. So I do have a model for it, and for those who weren't able to hear the question, you're doing continuous deployment, everything's going out to production, but I have something that's not ready. I need it to be tested. And it's not, I can't do it with unit testing, right? It's got to go through maybe an alpha, beta. You're trying to.
If you're working with user stories and you have several parts that
for the whole flow.
For the whole flow, and just one user story is ready, tested, and complete.
You've got the button, but there's nowhere on the other end of the button, right? So in that model, I'm going to actually, since I spoke about Etsy, that's a good one. So Etsy does continuous deployment to their productions. What they do is they've developed an advanced feature toggling system, whereby whenever they develop features have a config layer around them that allows them to turn it on and off. Not only can they do that, that's your first level of just Boolean, turn it on and off. They allow things to be security roles based on who's looking at it. They look at IP ranges so that they can roll out things to beta customers so they can kind of do that. They've gone and said, we're going to put a config layer in where we have the old code and the new code, and it's running side by side in production. And they can basically just change configs and suddenly turn it on. Microsoft is starting to do this now with their continuous deployment, where you'll see Visual Studio online. It's getting new stuff every 3 weeks. You don't seem to see a whole lot happening. Well, they're pushing stuff way, way before you see it. And then when they think it's ready, and they've had enough of a feedback, they push a button, bam, you get it now. So that's the approach that people go towards. There is a maintenance cost of that. As you can probably imagine, if you're forking your business logic and your UIs and your site core templates every time you make a change, you're maintaining 2, 3, 4, however many feature versions of a single thing. So you also have to bring in the culture of cleaning stuff up. And I know this is hard for a lot of us. We like to like keep it just there in case, but you have to have some kind of ROD analysis. Anybody here know what a ROD analysis is for content or an intranet? Okay, a couple. Just to go over it, you want to retire over time content. There's stuff that expires. It's no longer relevant. So on an intranet, this is a thing about who's not looking at this PDF anymore. Why are we paying for storage? On a website, this is about are we maintaining an authoring page that makes no sense, no one's ever looking at it, and it costs us money. For code, this is those features you're toggling. Do we need to keep that old version? When we finally said that it's going to go live and everyone's seeing it, shouldn't we just get rid of the old stuff? So you need to bring in that process as well, a culture of refinement of your code base, reviewing it. Now you're talking about getting down the road, down on that other end of that scale. We were people down in the build, we're talking about operational there. And it takes money to do that, but you get a lot of benefits when you want to be that quick. But really good question. We'll take in the back corner.
Going back to looking at deploying full, like a full package versus deltas, I mean, I've done that with like using TDS or any sort of serialization technology. That's usually where the time in your build is. It takes it 20 minutes to push all those items out. Where you run it through Courier or something like that, at least you're only pushing. Somebody makes a CSS change and you're waiting 40 minutes while your templates redeploy that haven't changed.
Yep.
But is there any? Is it even possible to do the analysis to say only the CSS file changed and not push any assemblies or anything? Or is that the delta you were talking about more?
That is when you get into doing the deltas. I don't know of any tool that does it all right now for the deltas. There are tools like SUGCON you mentioned that does the deltas on the items.
Yep.
I'm not using any tools right now that are doing the delta on the code to like then merge those two and create a package that can be pushed together of both. SUGCON Courier, the last time I looked at it, was supposed to be doing that, but I honestly haven't played with it enough to know whether it's doing that.
Yeah, I was just curious because I've heard of doing deltas for code and assemblies and stuff.
I've been down that road, and I've done it by basically transforming the change set from source control into a package definition file, and then generating the package to deploy.
Because I mean, you gain a lot of speed on items. I just don't know if you gain much speed on static assets and stuff.
Yeah, I would say there's also if you're using a tool like TDS, there's the capacity in it to exclude stuff that maybe you have times when you're running, you have that initial kind of setup that you're running, and it's like, yeah, I did it once. Doing things like excluding from a config an entire tree, or doing things like deploy once, where you know this area is not being changed, why am I pushing it every time? There are ways for you to optimize there. The exclude is definitely the fastest, but brings in some other stuff that you have to then worry about, because now it's excluding, it means it's never going out. And now we start talking about now you're half doing big bang, half doing deltas. So it's definitely one way where you start optimizing and then figuring out whether or not you're at that point where now we need to make a shift, go up a level. I think there was another question in the back, yeah?
Actually, my company for the first time, we have a TDS and EFS, and we're trying to deploy multiple servers on AWS. So, do we have to get any more tools to do that, or we have to use package installation wizard, or like, what is the best approach? Because I know that your company is very good in like writing white papers, so I've seen many points.
I'm going to be upfront and honest and say I'm going to have to take that question away. I'm not an Azure guy. I don't know how to deploy to Azure. It's not something I've been looking in. We have other guys on the team who are more into that world. So if you want to just give me your contact info, I can go back to those guys writing the white papers and get to the answer you need for that question. Sorry about that.